On today's episode of Locked On Knicks, I'm joined by DJ Zullo to tell you how the Knicks are going to build a top 10 defense around OG Anunoby.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? You are Locked On Knicks. I want to remind you that today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. I also want to remind you to make Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. If you intend to become an everydayer, be sure to subscribe and hit that notifications bell to ensure you never miss an episode on YouTube. And then be sure to do the same on your favorite audio podcast platform of choice. I'm Gavin Schall. I've been hosting this podcast for 6 years, been covering the NBA for a decade now. And I'm joined by DJ Zullo, who is a contributor at Knicks Film School and just flat out one of the best people covering the New York Knicks. Really excited to take a deep dive with him on OG Anunoby. We also recorded an extra segment giving his thoughts for the first time publicly on the Karl Anthony Towns trade. I'm going to put that out in a couple of hours as a bonus episode because we ran a little long. So let's get into it on OG with DJ right now. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit while still touching on some of these elements and get into our originally stated purpose here, which was to preview OG Anunoby's season. He's 27 years old, going into his 8th year in the NBA. Last season, while on the Knicks, 14 points, 4 rebounds, 1.5 assists per game, 2 steals, 1 block, 49, 39, 79 splits. In the playoffs, even better, 16 and 7. Shot nearly 50% from the field, just under 40% from three, 62% at the line. Couple of interesting stats for those of you at home. Out of the NBA's top 6 two-man lineups that played at least 200 minutes last year, OG Anunoby was a part of 5 of them. If that gives you an idea of how dominant the Knicks were in the regular season when OG Anunoby is on the floor, that should tell you everything you need to know. And maybe it was the case to running things back a little bit more than the Knicks were able to. Also, currently 10th highest regular season plus minus in the last 36 years of Knicks basketball, despite only playing 23 regular season games. Little over 500 points away from overtaking IQ. I have a feeling that happens about 40 games into this season. Final one, a 41.5% defensive field goal percentage allowed. That was second amongst all players in the NBA who played 50 or more games. All right, big questions around OG Anunoby. The most obvious one, DJ, and the one that you and I and no one this side of God, the basketball gods, are really qualified to answer. Can he stay healthy? And how much trouble is this team in if he gets hurt? I think that is one of the downwind effects of this trade. And it's something I was talking about with your Knicks Film School colleague, XJ, when he was on the pod in the aftermath of this trade, where the Knicks maybe created a championship ceiling for themselves that wasn't there. The ability for things to go off the rails is also a little bit higher as well, because you just look at like who the wings are on this roster, where the perimeter defense is coming from, who is guarding both a Jason Tatum and a Jaylen Brown when you're playing the Celtics. If OG's going to get hurt, if something happens to him, you get thin fast. I think that's when you become really reliant on those precious cat lineups that I'm enjoying. And I haven't really seen people throwing out there as a potential starting 5 for the Knicks. It wouldn't shock me if Tom Thibodeau decided to go that direction and keep Josh Hart on the bench, but I don't know if there's a lot of intelligent analysis to be had there. I just felt like that needed to be thrown out as kind of the first big question here.
Yeah, I mean, he's so critical. So if he misses significant time, there's no, even Bridges, who is as fantastic a defender as he is, he can't replicate some of the versatility in terms of guarding up to 4s. He can guard some 4s, but he can't really guard 5s in the way that Anunoby can. So there's just a pretty wide gap, I think, between what type of defender Anunoby is and Bridges is. But I think potentially, if you're the Knicks, I agree that championship ceiling has been raised, and you're taking away some of your depth. But you have Hart and you have Bridges, who, to their credit, tend to be pretty. Bridges is one of the he's one of the ultimate Iron Men in the NBA, and Hart has been pretty healthy over his career. So maybe that provides a little bit of a cushion if and when Anunoby misses, some significant time, which he just has in most seasons. He does things that there's just no other player. There's a couple of players in the NBA that can defend at his level with his size and his length and his strength, and you combine that with his really high level awareness. So he's not replaceable. And I think the team, obviously you would have to say Brunson and Cat are your two most important players, but I think third to me is clearly Anunoby. Look, if he misses 30 games in the regular season and they still manage to win in the low 50s and he's healthy for the playoffs, you probably sign for that right now. At least I would. Maybe 30 is a little too high. If he misses like 20 games and he's healthy for the playoffs, like I'm good with that scenario based on track record and the fact that he was not healthy, obviously, throughout the whole playoffs last year. So he's just integral to what they do. And I don't know right now, I guess the worry would be before the season, you could say, yeah, with Hart and DiVincenzo and Bridges, you have enough to where you can maybe limit him to like under 35 minutes a night at the early part of the year. Now that was going down the trade-off with that, or not the trade-off, but the other side of the coin is he was probably going to have to play more small ball 5, potentially if you're going to maximize spacing and offense with the Randall version of this team. Maybe now that is somewhat off the table a little bit, at least to start the year. So I think that would take away some of the wear and tear potentially to try to keep him healthy. But I think the minutes are going to be high and they're going to remain high. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. So, you're gonna have to see how that all plays out, but he's so important to what they do. And there's only a few guys I think that you talk about his contract, and there's a lot. I think it's reasonable to call him overpaid, but you just look at the guys that can shoot the way he can, finish in transition the way he can, and defend the way he can. That is a very small group. And then you factor in he's 6'7" with a 7'2" wingspan, just a completely unique player who is, I think, the third most important player on the team. I don't think that's a hot take at all. No. And they need him at least, because the ceiling is the playoffs. That's what matters for this team. They need him healthy when it matters.
I think Brunson and now Cat established the baseline for this team. And I mean, obviously they have a lot to do with their ceiling as well, but Anunoby feels like he is the ceiling player. Like once you put those two guys on the floor, he is the difference between being very good and being a legitimate championship contender and putting up night to night metrics that kind of make you think like, all right, like this is a team that can compete with the Celtics. This is a team that can compete with the Sixers, the Thunder, whoever. My next big question about him, and I think the one I've been, just because the health thing is so nebulous, like I've been tossing around in my head the most. Like it feels like this Cat trade. I mean, to your point, less time at the 5, so maybe in that sense a little bit down. But this Cat trade is almost an acknowledgement of the fact that, hey, we put 5 first-round picks into Mikal Bridges, we put $200 million into OG Anunoby. Let's let them go earn it, right? Because the maybe not the entire weight, but the vast bulk of the weight of the Knicks being a top 10 defense. And if you listen to Tom Thibodeau, like he says, hey, we could be even better on defense this year. The weight of that is on these two guys with a full summer to scheme. How do you think Tom Thibodeau fully leverages having arguably the best wing defensive duo in recent NBA history? And come playoff time, just how much can that duo stop opposing offenses from picking on Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns when it matters most? How do you actually go about doing that?
Yeah, well, the first part of the question is, I think you're going to have, in my mind, I think Bridges guarding the point of attack for the most part, especially against smaller guards, especially against wings that don't have elite size. I think that's where he's probably at his best. And that gives Anunoby the ability to be where I think he really shines is as a help defender, as a weak side defender, as a guy that can defend the rim in low man situations. There's plays where he'll do things where he'll come off the strong side corner. So if there's a drive going to his side where he's guarding the man in the corner, and typically coaches don't want you helping off that side because the kick to that corner is so easy, and the closeout, you're probably not going to get there. But you'll see him often come off that corner player, stop the drive, and if that ball is kicked back out, have the length to be able to recover back out to that player. And that is just a very unique special ability to be able to contest a shot while also cutting off a drive. So his special ability, I think, is there. And then obviously guarding in isolation is another thing that he's phenomenal at. But I think having Bridges handle some of the, especially like the Maxis and the Lillards and some of the smaller, shiftier guards, I think having Bridges handle that, which is something he did routinely for Phoenix. And he's, because of his slenderness of his frame, he can get around and get skinny through screens and not expose his chest and contest from behind. Really good at that. So I think that gives the Knicks that sort of versatility to have Anunoby as much as they can do it off the ball and really disrupting things and just being a menace and passing lanes and digs and causing havoc in that manner, which he to me was one of the more impressive things watching him last year. And then in the playoffs, it's when you're playing Tatum and Brown, in the Celtics specifically, and trying to mitigate how they expose Brunson. I don't know. And this goes back to like some of the, I think, misnomer here about how switchable the Knicks are going to be. I don't think they're going to be as switchable as most think because Brunson is a factor, because Cat is a factor. If Brunson is in the action, you're just likely not going to want to switch. And the same could be said about Cat. Boston is like the ultimate switch team, but they can switch any. I mean, Drew Holiday is as good against 3s and 4s as he is against point guards and 2 guards and smaller wings. So I think there's that element that the Knicks just don't have. But it's a cat and mouse game. Like Boston or any good team is going to try to get Brunson in a position where he's going to be the last line of defense. And then it's up to the Knicks. Can you pre-switch out of that? Can you kick him out of the corner, have Brunson take the higher offensive player, Anunoby or Bridges or Hart, take the low man? And there's just those things are going to have to they're going to have to work out. And that's going to require a lot of communication. The T-Wolves often would pre-switch Cat out of action. So you saw this with Dallas where Dallas is trying to bring Cat up into the screen and he'll literally push out someone else, some other player to get into that action. So Cat is now can stay where he was initially defending, and then someone else is going to get into the switch. So those aspects that's the part that it really gets fun. And, there's always going to be the situation where Brunson and Cat are going to be put into situations where they're going to be exposed a little bit. That's just the nature of how the Knicks team is built, but they're probably, and Hart's a big part of this too, in terms of his ability to play off the ball and defend at the point of attack. They're probably set up as well as you reasonably could when you consider Brunson and Towns to defend at a high level. But it's going to require health. It's going to require playing on a string. It's going to require probably some of a learning curve because there's probably going to be more coverage confusion for this Knicks team than there has been in the past, because the way the Knicks have typically defended, it's been a very risk-free, a very standard drop coverage with minimal backline rotations. That's kind of how Tibbs has done this. When you have Cat as your 5, you can't just put him in a drop and expect him to defend well enough. Cat at his best is probably playing closer to the level of the screen. And when you do that, it's just going to require more tagging on the backside, which is going to be an adjustment for this team. So there might be a bit of a learning curve to start. But if you're building towards the playoffs, having a more versatile defensive group than they've had in years past, I think it's probably a good thing. Even if the regular season defense isn't as good, maybe you've built in enough versatility to where you can actually defend at the same level, if not a little better, if you are just a little more versatile and more have more ability to adjust on the fly.
All right, guys, we're going to be back with DJ to talk about what OG Anunoby could bring to the table on the offensive end. Is there a higher ceiling than what he's already shown in a Knicks uniform? But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. I would put my first $5 on the New York Knicks on opening night. 4.5-point underdogs to the Boston Celtics. I think they're going to come out and start the Karl Anthony Towns era with a bang. It's going to be a little weird for the Knicks, but it's also going to be a little weird for Boston because they've never played this version of the Knicks. I think the shooting is going to be a little bit of a shock. Not having Kristaps Porzingis to match Cat. I think Jalen Brunson has a monster night. Mikal Bridges has a great debut, and the Knicks get the win. Again, that's $5 to get started with $200 on FanDuel.com. Yeah, I think it's going to be so interesting, assuming they do get the Sixers or Celtics in the playoffs, just like what kind of lineups they lean into, because that is typically the time of year where you're playing a Jalen Brunson 44 minutes in a game. You're playing a Karl Anthony Towns 40 minutes in a game. And I wonder if there are points where, like, especially Boston is just punishing that to such an extent. You say, hey, we're gonna insert a Deuce McBride maybe a few more minutes than we would. We're going to insert a Mitchell Robinson a few more minutes than we otherwise would, because it feels like if you only have one weak point there, I mean, just obviously there are just more solutions. There's more things you could do switching. Precious Achiuwa, like if you want to get really switch heavy, you have a Hart, Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, Achiuwa lineup. Like, I would really be intrigued to see that group get some minutes. I was really impressed with Precious as a switch defender. Like in the regular season, I remember him just going to Tyrese Maxey and shutting him down for a couple of possessions. And I think you nailed it in terms of like the splits between using him, OG as more of a roamer and using him as a point of attack guy, because I loved against the Sixers last year when they made that switch, when they realized like, hey, like obviously like relative to his size and weight, he's extraordinarily good at guarding Tyrese Maxey, but this might not be the best use of him, and just flipping out to the perimeter. And then you see down the stretch of Game 7 flying in, blocking shots at the rim over and over again, finding a way to make a difference with his rotations. But you give a team like Philly credit where there just isn't that kind of iffy shooter to hide on anymore this year. And because of that, maybe you just say, hey, like, we are just going to throw him on a Paul George. We're going to throw Mikal Bridges on Tyrese Maxey against the Celtics. Like, one of them is going to take Tatum. One of them is going to take Brown. But that's sort of the beauty of having those two guys is they give you that optionality where they can both sort of do both things. I'm really, really excited to see what happens on the defensive end. And again, against like the right teams, like especially teams that want to like screen like 2 through 4, like having Hart, Bridges, and Anunoby out there at the same time, you will have more versatility than in years past, even if that doesn't extend to Brunson and Mitch. I want to flip to the other side of the ball, though. It's pretty rare you see a guy in their late 20s make an offensive leap, but is there another level to OG Anunoby? Because I think just like the moments where he'd be aggressive were so tantalizing. And I'm sure there are Toronto fans listening to this and groaning and being like, yeah, we saw that for 7 years. Like he was just never able to do that consistently. But like the last like real taste of a healthy OG Anunoby got last year was him dropping 28 points in 24 minutes against the Indiana Pacers. A game I went back and I watched some of the highlights of. I went back through my notes. He got 5 shots at the rim in the first 5 minutes of that game. Was just incredibly impressive with his ability to like use jabs and like use leverage to get defenders off balance, almost similar to Emmanuel Quickly, how he would like kind of use his butt to just put guys in jail and then burst all the way to the rim. Brilliant 2-man game with Isaiah Hartenstein. Then I'm curious your thoughts on his ability to replicate that with Cat and maybe even make it more deadly given Cat's shooting and how defenses have to press up on him. It just feels like there's a lot of meat on the bone, and sans Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle, like there could be more shots and more of an opportunity for him to have some big games, at least throughout the regular season, with those guys gone.
Yeah, well, I am. It sounds like I'm a little more skeptical, I think, than you are, just in this sense. You know, I think the ball handling is just so limited.
Yeah,
he's not a poor ball handler, and he's good when he has a head of steam in transition, but in tight spots, like it's just, I don't think it's good enough. I think you get not only sloppy with the ball, it's not a tight enough handle to where he's creating separation off a standstill. Now, where he is good, and I think this is where that game against Indiana where he really shined, is where he can come off pin downs and get into a dribble handoff and get some separation off that initial DHO. And then at that point, he can, as you alluded to, put his defender in jail and really use his size, because once they're in that position, it's just hard to get around his frame. And then he was able to finish, which has been over his career in the half court, something of a, hit or miss proposition for him in terms of his finishing. But, just looking at his Knicks run, he seemed to be a better finisher in my mind than I think the scouting reports from Toronto suggested. So maybe there has been some growth in terms of his ability to finish at the rim in the half court, which would be one way you can improve. You look at his handoff percentile in terms of his points per possession off handoffs was very good, both in Toronto and with the Knicks last year. So maybe there has been growth in that area. And again, that is that zoom action off where he's stationed in the corner, usually in the left corner, because he can get to his right hand, come off the pin down and get right into a DHO. And that's been a really nice way for him to get to his right hand and get either to the rim or, and this is another thing he really highlighted in the playoffs last year, like a nice little mid-range jumper, which typically is not high efficient offense, but especially in games where points are at a premium. So maybe this is more of a playoff thing. Him shooting, 48% on in long twos or any mid-range jumper to me is a valuable aspect when you're not scoring 120 points a game because of the nature of your opponent and it being the playoffs. So there's probably some growth in that area. And then the other thing is, like, can he be a better above the break shooter? His corner 3-point shooting has been phenomenal for most of his career.
44% last year from the corner, 31% everywhere else. So
44 in the corners, 31 above the break. Everywhere else. Yeah. And look, he comes up short often. I think there's a release point limitation to where he doesn't get a lot of great energy transfer from his, he's a little disjointed where where he's coming up through his shot from his lower body. It's not clean up to his release. Like there's a point to where that energy transfer sort of breaks down a little bit above the break. In the corner, obviously it's not as a big of an issue. So if you can clean that up a little bit and become a better above the break shooter, it adds to your versatility, because if you're going to play Bridges, Anunoby, and Hart, you probably want Hart in one of the corners to, like, if you're going to have a true 5-out look with the Cat Brunson pick and roll, you probably want Hart in one of the corners. And if not, if Anunoby needs to be there, then you might look to do what Boston has done with Drew Holiday, maybe play him in the dunker spot, or use Hart as the screener and then have Cat as your slot spacer. So there is certain versatility, but Anunoby being a better shooter outside the corners, I think is a big factor. But I would err on the side of, like, if he at this age, if he can just replicate his offensive production, keep his efficiency where it was as a Knick, and then defend and stay healthy, you're still getting like a sub all-star level player who is probably a legitimate, like, all-star level player in the playoffs, because his value, I think, increases in that world. So that's kind of where I would land. Now look, he can come into this year and the ball handling looks tighter and the shot looks cleaner, and he's maybe lost a little bit of weight and he's moving better. But those are things, as you mentioned, at 27, 28 probably is not going to happen, but that doesn't mean that you can't improve around the edges. And I think we talked about a few things where he can potentially do to improve his skill set, despite maybe not having better top line numbers, because I think the talent around him is a little better, especially after Randall went down last year.
Yeah. And to your point, I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit for him to be a very efficient offensive player. Like he is just an awesome cutter off ball. And that was like when I was like on the last pod we did on Cat, like kind of talking about, like, the previous roster just didn't make sense. Like they were just, unless they were playing 5-out, which I guess they were going to be for some amount of time each game, they were just really ill-equipped to take advantage of that fact. And Julius Randle, who's a very good passer, like maybe he could have been good at this, but like we never really seen him operate just as like a consistent, like, hub, like center
not his
offense. Like, yeah,
he's never been able. He's more of a, like, driving post player that can draw two in that way. Then he's gotten better at that pass. But in terms of like the Hartenstein, Towns, like Sabonis level, like DHO hub, cutting, passer off corner cuts, like that, hasn't been his skill set. And I just probably not going to be his thing that he's been great at. Towns is, to your point, really good at that. So that could be a nice pairing between him and Anunoby.
All right, guys, we'll be back with DJ one final time to talk about the duo of Karl Anthony Towns and OG Anunoby on the offensive end. How Karl Anthony Towns is sort of going to be an elevated version of Isaiah Hartenstein, and how OG Anunoby can take full advantage of it. But first, we want to tell you about our favorite ticket buying app over at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I love this. I don't want it to be on me to find the best deal. I get FOMO and I spend hours and hours and hours. Instead, with Game Time Picks, now that I live just a couple blocks away in Phoenix from the Suns Arena, I can go over and see. They have an $86 ticket I'm literally looking at right now. Sorry, $84 ticket to sit about 20 rows up, center court. That to me, if I'm not sitting courtside, that is the best possible seat in the house for only $84. I don't care that's a preseason game. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to have myself a great night. Game Time has a bunch of other features that separate them from the crowd. My personal favorite is their lowest price guarantee, which means if you find a cheaper ticket on a competing ticket site, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference, meaning there's literally no reason to ever use another site because the cheapest ticket will always be on Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. You can create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Yeah, I just think like going back and watching some of his playoff highlights, I forgot just like the level of chemistry him and Hartenstein had got to, where it was almost like wide receiver quarterback at a certain point. We'd literally just see like it wasn't anything fancy. It was Hartenstein with the ball at the top of the key, OG coming up like half speed, like feinting towards Hartenstein, like he was going to set his screen, and all of a sudden like full speed straight to the rim. Hartenstein hits him for a dunk, and just different variations off that. And I think that is, to your point on his handle, like so important for him to like create leverage off the ball preemptively, and then already kind of have like a half step on a defender. And he knows how to manipulate that. He knows how to take advantage of that versus like he's just, to your point, like not a person you throw the ball and say, hey, go get us 30 tonight. But I think there's some real magic to be had there. And I just think like the nights where like you do start a Mitchell Robinson, he's getting a smaller defender, like his ability to like leverage his physicality. If there's one thing that I think he could really lean into that isn't like super skill based. I'm hoping he watched a lot of Julius Randle last year, and I'm hoping there's just like a little bit more like mean, like bully ballness to his game. Again, a little bit harder when he's playing the 4, but when he's playing the 3, I think there are times to lean into that. I always really liked when he just gets to the middle of the floor, take a short fadeaway jumper. Not super efficient on that in the regular season, 31% mid-range, 39% mid-range in the playoffs, to your point. But he got great shots when he was on the Knicks. 43% of his shots came at the rim, up from 33% in the first half of the year on Toronto. You would only expect that to like go up or stay roughly the same with Karl Anthony Towns in tow. Final point on his offense, like what specifically do you make of the two-man game between him and Cat? I know we just kind of talked around it a little bit, but I'm just like thinking of the ways like Cat is not only a spacer, but someone who like similar to Dante DiVincenzo can be like a really deep spacer. Like how can OG kind of take advantage of those openings?
Well, it definitely opening up the floor. You mentioned the cutting. You know, OG he not only can he cut from the baseline, but he can 45 cut from the wing or the slot, and that just with the amount of space he's going to be offered is going to create passing lanes and passing windows. So he's going to have ample opportunity to really tap in more, I think, even than last year, some cutting. And I think Towns, and we both agree on this, better passer than Randall from a standstill position where he can see over the defense at 7 feet, can pass he can do over the head passing, which again he's just increasing the passing angles, and he can get the passes that Randall just he couldn't, and where Hartenstein was, I think, a better like low bounce pass player. It can really make those sort of like, dribble at you, McBride back cut and a single bounce pass and get McBride on a lot of those. I think Towns is actually probably a little more efficient passing over the tops with his length. So that could be something that Anunoby could really tap into. And then, if you have Cat as if he's coming off a pin down, Anunoby, and he's coming on into a DHO with Cat, you can do so many things. You can obviously just hand the ball off, but Cat often would just fake that handoff. And then if you have a defense that is trying to switch that, you probably are going to have an opening there for Cat to take 1 or 2 dribbles with his left hand and get all the way to the basket. So that's something where Hartenstein would sometimes do, but that's something that Cat often does. And he's obviously a better ball handler and better finisher going to the rim. So if you have that feature with Bridges and Anunoby in that, Zoom or Chicago action, and you really are now playing with the defense to where like, if that ball you hand that ball off and you're trying to stay attached and you're locking and trailing and you're trying to prevent Cat from basically rejecting that and going downhill, Then Anunoby can get a step and get downhill. Then Bridges can get a step and get downhill. So it really adds the variability of that action, which was really good for the Knicks last year. And I think it'd be better because of Cat's versatility as a ball handler, shooter, and driver of the ball. Where I think he's a good driver. I think he gets in trouble when he sort of predetermines those reads. But if he's got the element of surprise and he's got a spaced out floor, and he should have more driving lanes. And that's where I think the lack of Gobert or lack of playing with a big is really going to help him, is that I think the drive should improve and the finishing, because the space will be just more ample for him. And those single gap driving lanes, and a single gap is basically like if you're driving from the top of the key, and you have a defender in the right slot and a defender in the left slot, that's a single gap. And that's where you get like deflections. And if that play on if that defender on the right side is not there because the spacing is so open, then that's now a double gap, and you can really drive in without having to worry about a help defender coming in and digging at the ball and disrupting you. So there's certainly ways to really tap into that OG handoff game where I think he was really good last year. Then Cat's ability to be versatile in that action should help. And, I think Hartenstein was good at it last year, but again, it was sort of like the same thing with him over and over again. And he would usually just hand the ball off. Rarely would he put it on the floor and try to drive the basket. I think Cat's a different breed in that way. And the Knicks are going to have to use that a little bit, because I think it's a nice change of pace for them.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an incredible duo. I'm excited to see OG's connective passing. I think you lose a little bit of that with Dante DiVincenzo gone. He's someone who is not like an ultra intuitive passer, but is super willing. And I just thought you saw that get better over the course of last year, playing with so many other great passers. But DJ, I know we got to send you out, buddy. Thank you so much for doing this. Before I let you go, can you just quickly tell everyone one final time where they can find all your great work?
Yeah, find me on X at DJ Ace NBA, and a lot of stuff going on with the Knicks Film School. We're going to be doing, finishing up our previews. We'll have during the season a lot of breakdown videos. What else are we going to be doing with them? Just a lot of a lot more analytical work with the X's and O's aspect of it. Mailbag shows, talking strictly X's and O's, and trying to dive into like how this team is going to operate, which we'll all be learning on the fly, which would be nice to sort of figure this out with all of you, because it's going to be a interesting, challenge, I think, for Tibbs, in the sense that he's got an elite offensive group, and he's going to have to figure out a way to maximize it. So I'm very curious to see if any of that, dexterity and creativity that was last year after Randall got hurt, what carries over into this year, and just how are they going to, how's the Brunson pairing with Cat going to actually play when they're on the court together? So fascinated to see it, and always happy to be a part of the show, and I appreciate you having me on.
As someone who fills the Tom Thibodeau axiom of watching the games 4 times, I think you'd have more fun than ever watching the games 4 times. And I cannot recommend enough everyone tune in every single time DJ and Benji Ritholtz do those Q&As. There's no faster way to become a smarter, more educated Knicks fan. DJ, thank you so much, buddy.
You're welcome. Thank you.